earlier video where I was talking about how we found a place to rent in Harlem, I was talking about the city's efforts to make the area a little bit nicer, and I used the term revitalization instead of gentrification. People were like, hey, that's gentrification, not revitalization. So gentrification is when wealthier people move into an area and they change the character of the area and they displace current residents. Now, when you're talking about wealthy people, you're not usually talking about like really wealthy people. Usually it's even lower middle class people that just can't afford to rent anywhere else. Obviously, displacing current residents is really bad, but in addition to that, it also keeps lower income people from moving in because all of the apartments are taken. The stigma of the word gentrify makes me feel uncomfortable because nobody wakes up and they're like, I'm gonna rent a place so that somebody else can't rent it. I think what actually happens is like what happened with us. We're looking at Zillow and we're like, that's too expensive, that's too expensive, that's too expensive. And then you see a place that's more affordable and you're like, hey, that's great, let's apply there. And then the unintended consequence is gentrification. So on the city level, I really hope there's no like New York City planning meeting where in some back room they're like, hey, let's make this part of the city unaffordable so only middle class people can move in. I think what actually happens is in the city planning meeting, they're like, okay, this street needs more trees, let's fix that playset and let's fix that pothole. I feel like the city, on some levels, is trying to revitalize things, and the unintended consequence is gentrification, unfortunately. So I watched this documentary. It's actually really good, and they do address gentrification. And surprisingly, the residents they interviewed were not upset about gentrification. They were more entertained that someone would build multi-million-dollar condos across the street from the projects. But the men interviewed did live in the projects, and so their rent was stabilized and their living situation was pretty stable. But getting into New York City's rent-stabilized apartments is very hard, and there's a lot of competition. Yes, both the city of New York and our family is guilty of gentrifying Harlem, but at least for our family's part, I'm hoping that we can support local businesses and be part of the solution, even if we are part of the problem.